Hi all, this is May and I'm recording this from the 11th of July. This is the day right after the GE has already concluded. And in fact, I'm in fact preparing to sort of publish what I had recorded a few days ago with regard to the election videos. So this was I just want to make a quick introduction that when we first recorded the video a few days ago, it was based on the fact that the election was going to close at 8 p.m. Now, we were thrown a bit of a curveball yesterday because at about 7-ish, which was really, really late in the election, that actually an announcement had been made that they're going to extend the voting until about 10 p.m. Okay, so that was a bit interesting. And for an astrologer, this presented a very interesting situation because I have never heard of an election having gone and extended the closing time by about two hours. So, see, with regard to most astrological theory, it's that we tend to take the chart for the moment that the election closes, which means anybody who wanted to vote has already voted. And the original video was shot for 8 p.m. So when this announcement came at about 7-ish, what happened was I shot another one last night. And what happened was I shot it with a 10 p.m. The prediction based on the chart. Now, those of you who are familiar with Western astrology know that the chart is correct to the minute. So what this means is, like, for example, if somebody is born on the same day as you, that they are born, the time at which they're born is different depending that they will generate a totally different chart, and this is why Western astrology makes a distinction between twins. So in this case, it's the 8 p.m. chart and the 10 p.m. chart is a 2-hour difference, and this is massive difference to a Western astrologer. So the thing was, I shot both because the reality is I don't think there's an astrologer in the world who knows whether in such a situation is it the 8 p.m. chart or the 10 p.m. chart that will make more sense. And of course, I've stayed up all night to watch the election results. And now, interestingly, it's hands down that it was the 8 p.m. chart that still holds up as by far way more accurate than the 10 p.m. So what's interesting here is that I don't know if any other astrologers are watching this, but I suppose one of the biggest conclusions I'm coming to here is that in the unprecedented situation yesterday when election was delayed, I don't think it ever comes out of an intention for an event that actually affects the outcome of the election, but rather I think on a physical level that there just wasn't enough time to sort of process all the voters. So it does seem like if people voted at between 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., that frankly, perhaps the decision had been made as of 8 p.m. It's just that they needed to sort of put their vote onto a piece of paper. So then here goes. So I mean, if I could just quickly review my performance, and you'll see the video in a short while. I'll make sure it's like all spliced together so that right after this little introduction, I'll just sort of put the introduction, the prediction that I'd done a couple of days back. But of course, I mean, if I were to review it, I would say by and large the answer is there. So one of the first things that I said in that video was that there wouldn't be a change. And if the previous election delivered 6 opposition seats, that with a fixed ascendant, I wasn't honestly expecting it to be anything else other than 6 seats. And even as the sample results came out saying that Sengkang was in the lead, and in fact it looked like the Workers' Party was going to win Sengkang. But you see, I mean, everybody considered that there was potentially a 3-4% potential swing from the sample vote. So that until the official result came out, we didn't know. And even right up to the end, I thought, well, I mean, there were a couple of things that were kind of like on the line in that sense, because when the sample votes came out, it didn't seem that Hougang or Aljunied was going to like swing that far. I mean, it was pretty clear Workers' Party victory. It was Sengkang that was kind of like on the line, and even then, the official result is something is I think it's still within that 4% range. So and the thing is, why am I putting this introduction here? Is that you see, I could absolutely choose not to publish that video because after all, it wouldn't be nice if I posted something that was absolutely 100% accurate. But you see, I always knew that I was going to publish it only after. the election. So then, the reality is it's not going to make a difference to anybody. But the only reason why we're putting it up there is because people are very curious as to what astrology actually says about the election, and people want to know. So of course, I mean, I could be a real coward and say, well, I wasn't 100% right. I'm not going to post it. But you know what? It's not going to harm, or it's not going to harm anybody, but it's not going to do anybody good either. So and if you're watching this, it's you can only be doing this out of an interest in astrology and not because it makes a difference to you, because the results are already out. Okay, so so the first was that I originally assumed that because it was a fixed ascendant, that there wasn't going to be a change in the result. But I've reflected a little bit, and yes, I mean, Workers' Party went from 6 seats to 10 seats. And I suppose, I mean, in terms of like, did the result change? I mean, you can decide from watching the video shortly after this, but you can decide if ultimately did it, it's one additional GRC. But does it actually change the rubric? Because the PAP has lost GRCs before, and that's the one time with Aljunied, and then again in 2011, and then in 2015, and then Aljunied again right now. So in that sense, losing another GRC by itself, it's not a new thing. But I think it's rather like, what it really means, because I suppose parliamentary wise, yes, it's just 4 more voices. But in terms of, does it actually change are they in a position to influence the constitution, or really to vote against any of the major decisions? Possibly not yet. So in terms of that essential change, not yet. Although the Workers' Party is going to have a bigger voice from now on. So that's the first. That wasn't like perfectly there. And the other thing I also said in that video was that the Workers' Party was going to be strong. And I said that every time Mars is in Aries in an election chart, the Workers' Party has made headway. So I fully expected Workers' Party to sort of have a victory of some sort. But because Chiron was there, so those of you who know astrology know that Chiron with me is a pain indicator, that they had to lose something. And that's why it was my expectation was that I thought that they might lose something that they had held, but then maybe win something else. And I suppose now, on hindsight, reflecting now, I mean, of course, the victory is in Sengkang GRC, but I think that there's still a sense of that loss. It's like they're very tui, right? Because I mean, they came close in quite a few other places, East Coast, Marine Parade. Possibly not the SMC, the one with Tan Chun Chun, but I think with the other 2 GRCs, that came really close. And anyway, so a victory and a pain at the same time. Having said that, I have a feeling that they're not fully bothered by this. It's strong. I mean, Workers' Party is getting a very good vote share in the constituencies that they've contested in. Now, the other thing that I had said with the 8 p.m. chart, which did not come true in the later chart that I had seen. So essentially, it's I know for a fact that even with the extension, the 10 p.m. chart did not work, because with the 10 p.m. chart, the PAP had Venus as a bigger influence on them, and that usually is a good result. And while the 8 p.m. chart had Uranus being a bigger influence on the PAP, which stands a bit more for chaos or destabilization. And I think anybody who's watching this will agree with me that the ruling party PAP is greatly destabilized by the result of this election. And that's why I say, hands down, the 8 p.m. chart is the one that holds, despite the extension. And yes, so that part is perfectly fine. Now, the thing that has not been sort of addressed, and the thing about the Sabian symbols is a little bit shaky. So later when I talk about the Sabian symbols, I'll explain it in the video. But it's always, the jury's always out. As astrologers have debated left, right, and center whether Sabian symbols really work. And I mean, it seems to have given some pretty good insight in some of the previous elections. You have to decide this time around if this is the case. Okay, so I suppose the election does still describe, the PAP trying to sort of maintain an old Adobe mission. Okay, so I promise you watch the video and it'll make sense to you that the PAP is still trying to maintain that old Adobe mission, but the result of it, interestingly, that said that the gold rush tears men away from the native soil. That actually would and in this case, no, I mean, some people sort of stuck to their guns, and sorry. And so the people have stuck to their guns, and it remains to be seen how the results of this election is going to make an impact on Singapore, especially in its economy, in the next few months, because charts don't look good. Okay, so here goes. I'm going to sort of pause here, and then we're going to splice in the prediction from 8th of July, when we did the prediction for GE 2020 based on the chart of 10 July, 8 p.m. Enjoy yourself. This is going to be one of my very unofficial videos. As you can see, it's not taken with my full video camera, just something that I'm doing on my home balcony. And in fact, the topic is going to be on the Singapore general elections. In fact, today's date is the 8th of August. I'm not sure if you can see my later, as I do my screen share, you will be able to see the timestamp on the bottom right hand corner. And in fact, we are 2 days away from the general election. And in fact, as you can expect, a lot of people have been trying to find out from me if astrology says anything about the outcome of the elections. And frankly, clearly it does. And there is a very, very good reason why I'm not publishing this video until after Friday, when the election results are out. For the simple reason that what I'm about to do is not merely just a commentary. If this was a commentary about my personal views, that would have been fine. Anybody is entitled to their views. But however, this year, in 2020, it just happens that a lot of my webinars are gaining a lot of attention. And I suppose in a good way, astrology is starting to gain some credibility as a prediction medium. And what's one of the very strange things is that as we get credibility, that means anything that I say about the prediction of the outcome of the Singapore general election might very well go viral or whatever it was. Okay, and quite frankly, for the people who will watch this long after the elections are over, as of the time that I'm saying all this, I can simply only just sort of present to you my findings. And quite frankly, the last people I need like sort of knocking on my door is POFMA. Okay, so I don't need that, and so therefore this video is only ever going to see the light of day after the elections are done. Okay, but having said that, so why am I doing this video? Quite frankly, it's not going to be of any use to anybody, because then the election is going to be over anyway. And so I suppose this video is not going to be, frankly, anything else except as an interesting video for people who had any interest in whether astrology is at all useful for predicting an election. And I mean, there's like astrologers can quite safely do this in other countries like in the United States, but I suppose it's probably not very safe for me to do it here in Singapore. Okay, so yes, just knock yourself out, and of course you will be watching this posthumously in that sense, on hindsight. So yeah, here goes. Okay, so let me share my screen, and let me get to here. Okay. So I want to get to, first of all, okay, so this is the Singapore general election. If you happen to be watching this and you are not a Singaporean or you don't work here, in 2020, we are running this election in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. So for the longest time, there was a lot of speculation about whether or not there was going to even be an election this year, because the truth is they're only really obligated to sort of call it by next year, by April, if I'm not wrong. And of course, by this time, right now, I mean, it's 5:42 p.m. on 8th of July. So by now, there's messages going around saying that, some leaked video apparently that the PAP is only going to ever call elections during a crisis. But of course, right? I mean, it's not just the PAP that does this. There are other incumbents around the world. It's pretty much politics 101. Okay, so yes, okay, so when we look at this background here, I mean, ultimately, when we look at a general election like that, especially for those of you who are not familiar with Singapore and you happen to just be watching this. Now, Singapore's election is a bit strange in the sense that it's very different from how it happens in other countries. For other countries, it's very interesting to see who gets elected or who's going to win the election. Singapore might just be the only country in the world for which our election it's not going to be a surprise who wins the election, as in it's a given. And I know that there are some Singaporeans who have been sort of playing, or should I say, optimistically hoping for the potential that um, that that someone else might win the election this time round. But quite frankly, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, like ever. But what happens here is that as we look at the election results, okay, the way in which the methods in which astrologically we look at elections in other countries is going to be very different from Singapore. So that takes me into the overview. And you know what? Let's go into presentation mode. Okay. So yeah, okay. So let's go into that overview, and I just want to show you this particular astrology chart, and this is actually set for the 10th of July 2020. So that's this Friday, 2 days from now, that we are going to hold our elections. Now the chart is set for 8 p.m. because that is the official time that the polls close. So which means that for all the hours that go on, the 12 hours before that, as the country goes to the polls, you'll find that nothing is really set until 8 p.m. And what happens afterwards is vote counting. Okay, so the logic that I'm explaining to everybody here is that 8 p.m. is when the outcome is already decided. Okay, so it's just a matter of just counting and seeing what the result is. Okay, so in general, when we look at a chart, there are a few things in general that we sort of look for. And first of all, I mean, we're looking for like things that sort of stand out, okay, to us. And one of the first things that draw the attention for those of you who do know astrology, and here I'm just going to risk being a little bit more technical, okay? And I promise I'll come back to English just so that the rest of you who don't know astrology can follow the discussion. Okay, so one of the first things that jumps out at me in this chart is this planet over here, and this is Uranus. And those of you who have been following my webinars know that Uranus is a chaos planet. And in my webinars, I've sort of explained a special significance of when Uranus is at 10 degrees Taurus, which it is here, right here, like 10 degrees Taurus. And the fact that it's very close to this black line here called the IC tells you that Uranus is going to have a very major influence on this election. And this being the planet of chaos, essentially suggests that this is going to be either an unusual or a non-mainstream or a chaotic kind of election. So far, I mean, besides the obvious here, which is that we are having an election right in the middle of a pandemic, but its position here in the fourth house is very significant because in astrology, this black line here, this black line that we call the IC, the Imum Coeli, and the fourth house is representative of what we call the base, the foundation of the country. And when we have something like Uranus that is at this specific position, it indicates that there is a shakeup of what is stable or what people have come to be very reliant on. And I suppose when it comes to elections and in Singapore, frankly, we started to get used to a specific kind of outcome, which this particular placement by itself suggests that this is going to be a bit of an unusual election, or at least giving potentially an unusual outcome. Okay, I promise I'll go into more. Okay, and for those of you who know astrology, Uranus is in fact unexpected. And what this means is that the planet itself, okay, you see the planet here, actually does not have any lines connecting it to any other planets. Yes, there is one lone red line that connects it to the up arrow, but besides that, it has no known aspects. And for those of you who know astrology, this means that Uranus unexpected. And much as we say that Uranus at that position is chaos, its position of being unexpected makes it even more chaotic. Now, at this point, I want to sort of pause a bit and explain what does it all mean, okay? Because when we say chaotic, we don't always refer to just the election alone. I mean, the election is going to be a bit of fear mongering and like people politicking and saying rubbish about each other is common fare. And it doesn't just happen in Singapore; it happens around the world. So it's I don't think it's going to surprise anybody that the election is that way. You know, future elections are all going to be like that. Now, what is more significant, I think, is that the results of this election might be one of the reasons why it contributes to instability, at least for the next for a while. Now, the reason is very simple because in astrology, when we set an event date, sometimes it's good to sort of step back and ask ourselves, what really is the significance of the 10th of July 2020 at 8 p.m.? Is it only that this moment decides the outcome of the election, or is it that it decides the outcome of what happens to Singapore for, well, I mean, we could say the next 5 years, but if I may be quite straight here, it's really for the next few months, because sometimes, you know, we tend to have a short-term memory and you kind of don't really remember what happened in the last election, but its effects are going to still be on people's minds in the next few months, and especially as I have sort of explained in the last few webinars, my public webinars, that the upcoming months in August and September is going to be really shit, like for the world, and definitely for Singapore, for a small tiny country that is going to be easily sort of like, you know, if a wave happens in another country, we get the dredges of the waves, and what this essentially means is that for whatever result that we get out of the election, it is going to affect Singapore in a very major way in the upcoming months. It is, quite frankly, if I may admit this here, one of the reasons why I had so aggressively promoted my webinars in the last few months, because I had foreseen that an outcome like this could happen. Because I've asked myself multiple times over the last few months, like, why would, and I'm not even just referring to the charts in 2020, but actually the charts in 2021, that I've said in my June webinars that Singapore does not stabilize next year, and and for me, it's the government has been stable, and what I'm seeing next year tells me that stability is not what we have come to expect. That there is the ending of a chapter and the beginning of a new one, and what this means is that, you know, I'm essentially pre-framing up here to the fact that the outcome of this particular election is going to be somewhat unsettling. But as you can see, I'm not necessarily like smiling away. It's not. I believe that what I'm about to present as a potential prediction, it could be a lose-lose situation for Singapore if this outcome actually happens. Okay. Now, there are a few things that I want to look at also. Now, typically, in my observation, okay, I now have to admit right off the bat, okay, I'm with no suspicions whatsoever, that I'm absolutely an opposition supporter. And in fact, well, I mean, I'm linked to the constituency of East Coast GRC, so which means in this case, I am absolutely a Workers' Party supporter. So there is no doubt about this, and yeah, whatever. Okay, but the thing is, in my observation, and I've been watching elections for a number of years now, it's that the position of Mars, which is where you see Mars here, tends to show the results of the Workers' Party. Now, the last time that the Workers' Party was able to garner a GRC, a historical win in 2011 when they won alternate GRC, was when Mars was also in the sign of Aries. And here we have it. This red symbol here is also Aries. And what this suggests is that that the Workers' Party is going to be considered as doing well this time around, as in it is in its element. And sometimes astrology can be very literal. You can choose to believe it or not, but the thing is, the symbol of the I'm talking about the logo of the Workers' Party has some resemblance to what Mars looks like, and yeah, and sometimes astrology really is that literal, especially for traditional astrology. And traditionally, you find that the Mars also rules the midheaven. and which means the result of the election is going to be a happy Workers' Party response. Now, here's the weird thing. It's that's why, if you're not a Singaporean or you don't work here, it's very confusing to a lot of people that if I were to say this normally, it would sound as if they would win the election. But here's the thing: it's not logically possible for the Workers' Party to actually win the election because they haven't contested enough seats themselves. But you see, in this context, a win for the Workers' Party would be to do well. I mean, especially in terms of things like vote share. And the thing is, the chart doesn't specifically say whether they've done well in terms of capturing constituencies, or in terms of the popular vote. And in fact, there's one other indicator which doesn't bode very well for the Workers' Party, because let me try and get my cursor out. Yep. Okay, because you see that there's this green thing right next to Mars, and this is known as Chiron, and it is an indicator of pain. So what this means is that although the Workers' Party would be in its element in that sense, but that the result is still going to be like a pain, like they didn't quite get anywhere. So this is one hint, okay, so that I think the outcome is going to be a mixture of a win as well as, in that sense, a loss for the Workers' Party. Sounds cryptic so far, okay? And the other thing that I wanted to point out here was that in Singapore's case, it's different from other elections where like for example, in the United States, you essentially have A versus B. You've got the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party. Pretty much no one else gets anywhere in America. But it essentially has an A versus B kind of situation. But in Singapore, we don't have A versus B. It's essentially a given that the PAP is going to win. So it's a confirmed thing. It's just a matter of if there is a challenger. If you look at how this works, that here's PAP and it stands like a beacon of something, and then what happens is you've got all these challengers coming in to try and make some kind of headway with them. Now, in traditional astrology, I looking at this chart, I'm not going to use an A versus B kind of model. In fact, I'm going to use what is commonly known as the castle besiegement model. And what this means is that when I'm looking at the chart, it assumes that there is a very, very, very strong party which isn't going to lose. And it's up to, basically by default, they win, which is the truth. I mean, if nobody contests, they essentially get a walkover, which has happened in Singapore's history before. But what happens is that when you have a challenger, whether or not there's going to be a change depends on the challenger and not on the PAP. Okay, so what this means is that when we look at the incumbent, the indicator of the incumbent is essentially this line, this IC, which is at the bottom. Okay, so then I stand my ground. So in fact, because Taurus is where this line is, and therefore the indicator for the PAP here is Venus. And Venus is in Gemini, it's in the 5th house. In general, this is not like the best possible position, but it's not a bad one. And on top of that, Venus makes two aspects. Okay, the first is to Pluto, and the second is to Mars here. And what's interesting about both Pluto and Mars is that both of them are the rulers of the 10th house, both the traditional and the modern ruler. And what this means is that if this brown planet and this red planet here are connecting to the PAP's indicator, then we've gotten our confirmation that PAP is going to win the election. Okay, and in this case, for PAP, a win would be, well, I mean, not just beyond the obvious of them, winning more seats than anyone else, that they would still have captured the result that they needed, which would be, say, a minimum number of the percentage that they were aiming for, or a certain number of seats that they were aiming for. Potentially, say, like, not to lose any more seats to the opposition party. Now, but conversely, when we look at the challengers, so now we're looking at the opposition as a whole, and please take note that this does not specifically refer to any one particular opposition party. The comments that I made earlier about Mars being connected with the Workers' Party could very well be my fanciful imagination because of my support for the party. But well, I mean, we'll look down the next few elections for me to confirm my hypothesis that the Workers' Party corresponds to Mars. But let's just hope they stick around long enough for me to sort of observe them over the years. But what happens here is that with the ascendant in Aquarius, similarly, we also have the traditional and the modern ruler. So therefore, the opposition is represented by two planets, one being, this is Uranus, and the other is Saturn. Now, the interesting thing is that on one hand, so what this tells me is that when we have a split opposition here, it tells me that pretty much the opposition is split into two, which is that you have whoever is just simply disruptive, potentially just being naughty, perhaps, this is not particularly a strong position in the sense that it doesn't make them a strong opponent. But we also have Saturn in Capricorn. And those of you who know astrology will know that Saturn in Capricorn is in its rulership. And what this represents here is that we actually have a pretty credible opposition. That means they, in Singapore language, is they can make it one. And I think going by the lineup of the candidates so far, and going by the kind of presentations that's happened, we've seen lawyers like Pritam Singh, like Sylvia. Dr. Tan Cheng Bok is gaining a lot of attention this time around as well. Dr. Paul Tambia is drawing attention. So is Dr. Chi Soon Juan, who is shaping up really well to be a good leader of his party. And also another doctor that's been making waves right now is James Lim, the economist. And other people who are basically the strong members and the prominent members of the opposition, even people like Nicosia, is getting really, really prominent right now. And it's drawing lots of people to say that, well, I mean, if we were waiting for a credible Singapore opposition, well, I mean, this is probably as close as we get to it. Now, it's interesting that Saturn is at 29 degrees Capricorn, and that the ascendant is at 0 Aquarius. So for those of you who do know your astrology, what this means is that the opposition is just 1 degree, in fact, less than a degree away from the ascendant. Okay, and I'm going to explain later on what this means, because I have a lot more things to explain. This is, I suppose, it's starting to shape up to be potentially a longer video than I originally expected. But what the point that I'm trying to make here is that the opposition, there is half of the opposition that's really strong, and the other half is just, rubbishly making noise. Okay, so other things of note here is that we have both Moon and Neptune in the second house. And this is very significant because as part of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are a lot more bread and butter issues that normally comes up during an election, because and especially as the moon, those of my students who have studied psychological astrology with me know that this is in fact a double what we call the moon Neptune, because moon is right next to Neptune and moon is in Pisces. Okay, and so what this means is that the tendency for people to feel like victims, to feel like, oh my God, we're all going to die, or it's and specifically when it happens in the second house, it means we're all going to die, we have no money and we have no jobs and our incomes are at stake. So what this tells me is these are some of the underlying issues that are present in the election. Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to show that. Okay, so the thing here is that there are three specific observations that I'm going to apply. And while they may be technical observations, I've also decided that it's not enough for me to just tell you, like as if May Sim is making this stuff up, that for each of these hypotheses that I have drawn out for my calculations and my studies, I'm also going to refer to the charts of previous elections, because then in those elections we have seen the result, and therefore we are able to sort of draw the connection between them, so that I have some basis for saying that, oh, if you see this, then it means this. Because in the past, if it's happened 2 times, 3 times before, then maybe if it happens again, then we could very well have the same result. And those of you who have been watching my webinars realize that I've done this all this time, because I realized that that events and people actually do operate in patterns. Okay, so let's this is the list of the past elections that I'm going to be looking at. Now, Singapore went independent in 1965, and we have had quite a number of elections before this. And in fact, I think this is I'm going to skip the first 6 or 7 elections that were pretty much all they're all like Lee Kuan Yew elections. Okay, so 1991 is when I'm going to begin from 1991. And in fact, this was one of the elections that gathered a lot of attention because the opposition had 4 seats. Okay, so and for those of the Singaporeans who are as young as I am, I mean, you may not remember the days where the opposition had 4 seats, and so that was a major thing. And of course, that was not a good election for the PAP, because at the time, when they had 61% of the popular vote, that was considered like a really shit result. Okay, this is not the kind of results that Lee Kuan Yew normally gets. In 1997, the opposition didn't do so well. They lost a couple more of the seats, and of course, the 2 opposition seats went to long-term opposition people, Mr. Chiam See Tong and Mr. Loh Tia Kiang. Okay, so they are the absolute opposition with a capital O in Singapore, and of course PAP sort of improved their popular vote by about another 4%. So that was in 1997. Good for PAP because they recaptured a couple more seats, but and also good because their popular vote went up by a bit. Okay, and in 2001. So those of you might have recalled that this was right after the 9/11 crisis. And I don't remember the exact date now. I'll probably come to it later. But I think the 2001 election was like in September or November. Okay, basically in the second half of the year. And which meant that people were in pretty much crisis. Oh my God, we're going to die mode. But if you think about it, 9/11 was like very far away and nothing to do with Singapore, right? So what happened was the result was we maintained the 2 opposition seats, but look at the popular vote went up to 75.3, like everybody loves PAP. And in fact, this happened to be Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong's last election. I think it was his 3rd and last election as the Prime Minister. Like, it wasn't his last, but it was his last as the Prime Minister. And then the very next one was in 2006, where again, it was like the 2 oppositions were still Mr. Chiam See Tong and still Mr. Loh Tia Kiang, but the popular vote just plunged right down. Okay, so basically no more 9/11 and people didn't want to vote for PAP anymore. And this was important because this was Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's first election as PM. Sorry about that. And then we also had now, in more recent times, of course, the groundbreaking election was in 2011, when, have a look at that, the opposition seats went up by a lot. And of course, we will all remember that this was when the PAP lost the GRC for the very first time in Singapore history. And so that's for like, yay, Workers' Party. But if you look at the popular vote, that was a disastrous result. Because as far as Goh Chok Tong had been really upset with back in 1991, where he only captured 61% of the popular vote, but in 2011, as if it was even possible that Lee Hsien Loong's team actually did even worse than that at 60.1. And some of us may remember that right after the elections, it prompted Mr. Lee Hsien Loong to actually apologize for the job that his team had done. And that was like, oh my God, just CPAP apologize, right? And so this was one. And then in 2015, we maintained the result, okay, and look at that, PAP gathered almost 70% of the popular vote. Now that was kind of helped by the fact that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew kind of died, and so this was like, and it was, if I'm not wrong, Singapore's 50th anniversary, so everybody was kind of feeling a bit how to say, like we were all feeling nostalgic. I don't know. It's like let's all love Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and let's all like celebrate 50 years. Okay, and of course, next one is where we are right now. In 2 days' time, we're going to know the results. So I'm going to share my 3 observations, okay, and how they pertain back to some of these more recent elections and how are they going to like sort of affect the 2020 elections. Now, the first observation, okay, this is astrology, yeah. that if there are angular planets in the fourth house, it indicates the state of the incumbent. And of course, the incumbent here refers to that if the chart has got a planet near the what we call angular and fourth house, that it tells us a story of what's happening in the PAP camp. And so I'm going to start with the 1997 election. And this was the one where this was Goh Chok Tong's second election. And in fact, he had come into the election being in a bad place. Okay, now I'll explain to you why. Because in the past, right, our first prime minister was extremely popular, and he was very good with the popular vote. In his heyday, it was as high as, let me see if I get this right. Okay, it was as high as 86.7%. So for those of you who don't understand, what it means is out of 10 Singaporeans, 9 vote for Lee Kuan Yew. So it was that high at some point, and even at its lowest point, he was in his high 60-something percent. But in his entire prime minister career, Lee Kuan Yew averaged 73% of the popular vote. Okay, so he seldom goes below 70%. But what happens was with Goh Chok Tong, he had 61% coming into this in the previous election, so that he was like not in a good place. Basically, he wasn't performing in that sense. So he comes into this election hoping to improve that number. And the fact that we have Chiron, this is, if you recall, this is the indicator of pain. And therefore, when it's at this position, it simply means that it's not exactly, the PAP camp was not necessarily in the best of positions in that sense. And so what happens is, if you look at that, I mean, yes, they recaptured 2 of the seats, but those of you who are older and remember the stories, I mean, there was a bit of strife happening with the opposition parties at the time. I mean, you had people like Cham Si Tong sort of like suing his own party members. That was just ugly. Okay, so it essentially means that they kind of won because the other side was a bit screwy, and the popular vote didn't go up by that much. Okay, so basically it didn't really strengthen the PAP position. Then in 2011, now this was the one where they lost the GRC. And this was also the one where Lee Hsien Loong scored so low on the popular vote, he had to say sorry. Okay, and if you look at it in the fourth house here, where we had this space here with 2 planets. First of all, we have again the planet of pain over here. And Neptune is astrologically an indicator of loss, of like sliding away or losing something, or not having a good foothold. And in fact, both of these planets here suggest that the PAP was possibly in worse shape than it was in 1997. And of course, it showed in the results. And there you have it. Okay, so the lowest in popular vote in PAP history. Okay, so 60.1, and that was like terrible. Okay, and so here's the thing. Now in 2020, we also have an angular planet in the fourth house, and so far, when that thing shows up, we don't really have like fantastic news for PAP. But here's the weird thing: is like, didn't May just say that the victory was going to the PAP? So I'll just come right off the bat and tell you, those of you who are kind of like hoping. Of course, this is on hindsight, it will already have come out. Those of you who are hoping that this is going to be a change of government, like, dream on. Okay, not happening. Okay, but in any case, this is the Singapore election one. And of course, we have the chaos planet here. And like I said, it kind of tells you that there are some issues within the party itself. There's instability. This is not a pain planet, neither is it a loss planet, which tells you they're not going to lose anything. But it does tell you that it destabilizes their position. Okay, so if you, I don't suppose any of you will be taking notes now, because by the time this publishes is over, but you can write this down. I mean, the result of this election is going to destabilize the PAP. And I'm going to suggest that that's not a happy thing, right? If PAP destabilizes, means Singapore's destabilized, right? Which is not fun. Okay, and the second observation I'm going to make is that the mode of the ascendant, okay, I'll explain this. Okay, it determines whether there will be a change or not. Okay, so quick crash course. Okay, there are 3 modes in astrology, and which means that when we look at anything in astrology that comes with an astrological sign, and the 12 astrological signs are divided into 3 categories, or what we call modes. So the modes are named cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Okay, so then I'm not going to say anything much beyond this. Those who want to learn astrology, go sign up for my astrology course. Okay, I promise I'm a good teacher. Okay, but so with this, um, the ascendant, depending on which mode it is, tells us what we can expect out of it. Now, the election years with mutable ascendants saw significant change in the election result. And let me prove it to you. Okay, so in 1991, what we have was the ascendant was in Pisces, which is mutable. Mutable means there's change. And look at that. I mean, 4 opposition seats. It was like, oh my god, like, big change. So that means if you think about in Singapore that our elections are always like a castle besiegement, right? So then you have the castle, and if there is a significant change, it means that the invaders had made significant headway. Now, the second time was in 2011, and you all remember that was the year GRC went to an opposition party. And look at it, right? So the ascendant was in Sagittarius, and again, we had a major change. And there you have it, right? The GRC lost GRC for the first time. Now, another one is that the election years with the cardinal ascendants, they saw no change in the election result, but it was a first in some significant way. Okay, so I'm going to explain this. This was in 1997, and I'll be very honest with my audience here. Okay, so in 1997, the ascendant was in Cancer, and Cancer is a cardinal sign. I've done my research, and frankly, I was a bit too young in 1997 to honestly remember very much about that election. But what I do recall is that there was a lot of like a kind of like infighting among them, and frankly, I mean, if any of you are old enough to sort of remember what happened in 1997 election, might want to sort of contribute to the comments section or something. Maybe you can educate me. What was it that, because the results didn't change, but usually when we see a cardinal sign, it means that there was a first in some way, and I'll give you more examples later. Okay, so now the other one was in 2015, which was just our most recent election, in just over. And as we all know, there wasn't any change, right? The Workers' Party held on to Hougang and to Aljunied, but pretty much no other change, right? And in fact, the first time something happened in 2015 was that all the seats were contested. So what this meant was that every single Singaporean had to go to the polls. And this wasn't always the case. And if my history serves me right, that Singapore had never had a situation like that since 1965 and 63, and that was before our independence. We've never had since independence that everybody went to the polls. So that was a first. Yay. Okay. But that's not very useful to us. Now, what brings us to the third category, which is that the election years with the fixed ascendant saw no change in the election result. So let me prove this. In 2001, the ascendant was in there. Where I was correct, wasn't I? I mean, 2001 was the 9/11. That was in September. And so they held elections 2 months later, and everybody is like in crisis mode, right? So okay. So anyway, the ascendant is at 29 Taurus. Taurus is a fixed sign. And have a look at the results. Okay, so basically in 2001, there was no change. I mean, there was 2 opposition seats. We got 2 opposition seats. Nothing changed. Now, the next one was in 2006. In 2006, the ascendant was at 29 Scorpio, also a fixed sign. And if you look at 2006, 2 opposition seats. Again, 2 opposition seats. So not much changes. And in 2020, which is in 2 days' time, we yet again, this was 0 Aquarius, which is also a fixed sign. Now, my conclusion then would be that I don't think we're expecting, let me go back to that. So the last election was 6 opposition seats. And I suppose what it is describing could be that, well, they just maintained the 6 opposition seats. So which means there's a good chance that they maybe hold on to Hougang and to Aljunied, but potentially not much else. So then for everybody who was like rooting for Nicosia or James Lim or Dr. Chan Chain Bok or Dr. Tambia or Dr. Chi Sun Juan, might not be so happy this time around. Okay, I know I'm not happy with my prediction. Okay, so there you have it. Not going to have that, but don't forget I still have a third observation. Oh, sorry, this was supposed to be number 3, but who cares? Okay. So number 3 is that the Sabian symbols describe the election and it also describes the outcome. Now, I want to very briefly explain these Sabian symbols, okay, which is a lot of you who know astrology may not be familiar with the Sabian symbols. In very simple terms, astrology is a circle chart, right? Which means that there are 360 degrees, just like in a circle. And each of the 360 degrees has a name, every single one of them. And this name usually describes an image or an entity that that gives a picture to what we're dealing with. Okay, so I need to sort of caveat here that this number 3 is some people are just going to brush it off and say that this is rubbish and this is stupid, and I don't blame you. Sabian symbols are they're kind of far out. Okay, and even in traditional astrology, it might be used very often, like in the past, like seriously a few hundred years ago. But even a lot of modern astrologers now may not necessarily use Sabian symbols. I have done a bit of study with them. I found them very, very fascinating. And I have to admit, I sort of applied them to the election charts pretty much just for fun, really. But I have found the results to be very illuminating. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to walk you through them, and then you decide whether the Sabian symbols have any use or not. Okay. So I'm just going to go chronologically, okay, and I'll tell you what story the Sabian symbols have told about the last 6 elections, so that we may sort of determine what's happening in the 7th one. So in 1991, what happens is, okay, now when we look at Sabian symbols, the symbol of the ascendant, which in this case is 22 Pisces, describes the election. Okay, so it's just what the election was like. And the one at the top here, which in this case is 23 Sagittarius, describes the result of the election. Okay, everyone got that. So this one describes the election, the other one describes the outcome. Now, the Sabian symbol for 22 Pisces is called a materializing medium, giving a seance. And those of you who are not familiar with what a seance is, it's like you basically have all these like spiritual people gathering together, and then you have a medium who's ostensibly some kind of leader of some sort, sort of getting all these people to connect to some kind of spiritual universe. Okay, so whatever. But the thing is, you might be like scratching your head and going like, how the hell does this describe the 1991 election? So here's what happened in 1991, and go do your research if you don't believe me, okay? So what happened was Mr. Chiam See-tong kind of became like a leader of the opposition, where he got them all and they collaborated to deliberately not contest all the seats, because they identified, which if you think about it, it's pretty crazy, because in 2020 they're still talking about the same bloody thing, right? Back then in 1991, Mr. Chiam was speaking with the opposition, and they said, let's not contest all the seats so that we can assure the population that no matter what happens, the PAP is still going to be in power. Okay, so that no matter what happens, it's like we're not even contesting enough seats to even potentially throw them out of the government. Okay, so in that sense, and he was very convincing, which meant that they contested less than half of the seats, which was okay. So what was the outcome? If you recall, that was the year that they won 4 seats, and Mr. Loh Tia Kiang had 1 seat, and the other 3 seats went to Chiam See-tong. What was the outcome? 23 Sagittarius says, a bluebird perched on the gate of a cottage being watched. And so what I gather from this is that there is a cottage. It's the house, right? And it is being watched. And so, I mean, if you had a bluebird that was perched, I mean, you draw your conclusions out of this, okay? But essentially, was like, yay for opposition seats, right? Now, in 1997, again, I'm just going to show you both. So at what describes the election was 24 Cancer. And 24 Cancer says, a willful man is overshadowed by a descent of superior power. And in fact, I have to admit that my calculations for all the elections are really, really clear. And the only one of the 6 that's kind of giving me a bit of trouble is the 1997 one. I find it really hard to sort of get a good handle of it. So anybody who's old enough to sort of remember the details of 1997, please contribute to the comments. I'm very interested in this personally. Okay, yeah. So willful man overshadowed by descent of superior power. I mean, all I can remember is like, I think, if I'm not wrong, that this was one of those elections where Mr. Chi Soon Juan was harangued, and so clearly Mr. Loh Tia Kiang and also Mr. Cham Si Tong were probably like very, but basically all of these men were like, they were like one man standing, if you know what I mean, and definitely overshadowed, right? So basically all the guys with the money, and then there's that one guy with no money just standing up against them. Now, what was the result of the 97 election? And now this one, frankly, I had a bit of trouble with this. The music of the spheres, and what the hell, right? I mean, but now you can do your research. What happened was, I went to look at the logos of all the opposition parties that was contesting in the 97 election, and the only parties that really had a seat in parliament kind of had like round logos, like spherical logos. The PAP had a round logo. Yes, I know they have like their lightning strike, but it's kind of like a round logo. So does the Workers' Party. And in fact, SPP is also a round logo. Now, what I remember here was that Mr. Cham Si Tong had a bit of like a spat with his people of his original party, and yeah, I mean I'm just wondering that perhaps, anyway, there were only three parties that had seats and they all had round logos. So that was it. Okay. In 2001, this was the 9/11 one. And what describes this election was a peacock parading on the terrace of an old castle. Okay. So, and this interestingly was, like I said, this was the election in 2001. It was the one where they got 75.3% of the popular vote. Basically, it was a huge win for the PAP. And there you have it. I mean, I don't think anybody truly, there was no fight that year. I mean, it was a crisis year. Everyone knew it was theirs. And what was the result? A butterfly with the right wing, more perfectly formed. So this could also have, again, I was young at the time. I wasn't old enough to vote yet. But it also describes that potentially that the PAP was more organized than the opposition. But in any case, the result favors the right wing. Okay, so too bad for the opposition. In 2006, this was, if you recall, Lee Hsien Loong's first election. If I get this correct, I should think so. Yeah, this was Lee Hsien Loong's first election. And this was interesting. Okay, now the election was described as children in Halloween costumes indulged in various pranks. And I suppose when you talk about children, it could potentially refer to like a younger ministers, which at the time it was like Lee Hsien Loong had been sort of introducing his guys in that sense. Now, one of the things that stood out in the 2006 election was an attempt by the PAP to, and there you have it, you still have the campaigning vans, right? Okay, let them pass first. This is Tan Cheng Bok's election van. Okay, I think I can go on, right? Yeah, so one of the things that stood out was that there was an attempt by the PAP to bribe well, I have to be careful now, right? I don't want POFMA coming after me, okay? So to entice the residents of Potong Pasir to vote for the PAP with an $80 million upgrading plan if they sort of abandon Mr. Cham Si Tong and vote for them. So that was children in Halloween costumes indulged in pranks. And the result of the election was that after the heavy storm, a rainbow. So the fact that Mr. Cham Si Tong held on to his Potong Pasir ward was in fact like, after getting harangued by all these people, it's like, hey, I got my rainbow, which is kind of nice knowing that Singaporeans can kind of hold on to their guns, which is potentially a bit more than what we can say with this election. Okay, so then in 2011, so this was the one where the Workers' Party won the GRC. Now, interesting was, it said here, retired army veterans gather to reawaken old memories. So I have to admit, I don't quite remember the election now, but possibly we basically have all these people, maybe, I don't know, singing the praises of all the old ministers, and potentially we had lots of younger people saying that, yeah, but that's like, the old guys. How about the new guys? Okay, then now the result is the interesting one, because so far in all the rest of the elections that I've shown you so far, the outcome did not surprise anybody. That there was like, we just shrugged it off. It was like Lo Tia Kang and Cham Si Tong. We were kind of used to that, weren't we? But now this time around, I thought the Sabian symbol just blew me away. And it says here, the luminescence of dawn in the eastern sky. And that was interesting because finally the dam breaks and GRC, and no less in the eastern sky, right? And so it was clear. It's like something broke. Okay, so yay! Workers' Party got Aljunied at the time. Now this was the last election, where pretty much nothing changed, And now this one, I have to be real honest. I not really sure what it means. Okay, so the triangle with wings, I don't know. Does it refer to a three-cornered fight? I've looked at the logos of all the political parties, and it seems like the only one that sort of makes sense is SDP, with the little red triangle. But I didn't see any wings, so go figure. You decide, okay? And if any of you have comments, then feel free to put it in the video. But the result was interesting, because it says here a group of people outfitting a large canoe at the start of a journey by water. Okay, but what I make of this was that 2015 was in a lot of ways very disappointing for the opposition. They didn't really make much headway. They frankly barely held on to Aljunied and to Hougang. But it does suggest that there are people sort of preparing for a much longer journey. And I think this is interesting, okay? So then they're outfitting a large canoe. So it also suggests that even if the opposition hadn't made any headway at the time, but that people would be prepared that, it's fine, there's going to be another one, okay? Yeah, so this is what I see. Okay, so we come to 2020, and I've kept you waiting long enough. So what's going to describe this election? Now it says here, an old adobe mission in California. And so far, the Sabian symbols that I've shown and I've described, they were easy enough to understand. I have to admit that when I first looked at this, I was like, what the hell is an adobe mission? I tried to figure out on my own, and then I figured out they probably were not talking about the PDF software, right? So then what I did was, now I'm going to show you my browser. So I went on Google and I typed Adobe mission, and it still didn't make any sense to me because they pretty much put the mission statement of Adobe, but it all made sense when I clicked on images. Here goes. Aha, that's what an Adobe mission looks like. What do you guys see? I don't know about you. I see a big white building, white. Okay, and so it does seem as if that this election, and I think this accurately describes this election. And I'm so glad I'm recording this because I'm not really sure I remember this in the next election. But what you essentially have is a big white building, very imposing, and and it stands in the desert like this. Look at it. It stands in the desert all by itself, like a steady building. Okay, so yeah, and I think I kind of made my point. Okay, and I kind of reviewed the wording for the outcome. So what will be the outcome? Coming this Friday, it says here that the gold rush tears men away from their native soil. And this is interesting because the Sabian symbol suggests that there is a choice to be made between the gold rush or their native soil. And I think this election has been interesting in the sense that people could choose to stick with our roots, go back to the neighborhoods, go back to the people, and talk about how we're going to sort of reward old people. That keeps coming up, right? Old people, the jobs, and that kind of stuff. Most of the opposition parties are talking about this, like protecting us from excessive taxes and in crazy insurance and that kind of stuff. And what the PAP was promising really was that, hey, look, Tyson Ye is here, and we're gonna. Isn't that great? I mean, vote for us and you get money, right? As if it's their money. It's not their money. It's taxpayers' money. But some people didn't quite get that right. So so the result says that the gold rush wins. It sort of tears people away from their native soil. So what's the result, my ladies and gentlemen, is that the people end up voting for whoever gives them money, which is probably, in this case, the PAP. Okay, so there you have it. So I mean, if you think that the Sabian symbols are at all reliable for giving a result to the election, you got it. I mean, it's frankly, it looks like a PAP whitewash that people have voted according to the wallets rather than their hearts. But here are my conclusions. Okay, so let's put it all together. I mean, what I said from the beginning was like, let me just conclude this, okay, and go through it again. Sorry, I know it took a while, but it's showing that the PAP is not necessarily strong, and we've seen that they started to be a bit kind of shaky. I think even the average person can see that there's a high display of insecurity during this entire election. That they are going to win is never in doubt. And it started to show that the opposition is now divided, which is very interesting because we've always thought of the opposition as kind of like the opposition. But and in recent years, as some of the parties have started to sort of step up a little bit, it's starting to show that even the opposition got different class also. They've got the high class and the not so high class opposition already. And I think it's been very well established this election. Okay, not very sure if Mr. Tan Cheng Bock is still going to be around for the next one, but pretty sure the rest, the other contenders, might very well still be sticking around and going strong for the next one. But it does show that but you see, here's the thing: the chart actually suggests that Workers' Party is going to do well, and what I'm going to suggest here, okay, it suggests that Workers' Party is going to do well, but yet the fact that the ascendant is fixed tells me that the result doesn't change. So which means that in the past, if they held on to 6 seats, there's a good chance that they still hold on to their 6 seats. It's the only happy thing that I see here is that luckily it's not a mutable ascendant, which could mean a significant change, which would means even 6 seats we don't have. But the fact that it's the same, it's fixed, tells me it's probably going to be maintain 6 seats. But the Workers' Party is going to be happy and that they've done well because I think they start to gather a high percentage of the popular vote. That means in the constituency, specifically, this is entirely my opinion, that I think Dr. Jamus Lim is going to make some headway in Sengkang, where there are young people there who will vote for a young person, articulate and confident. I think that they're going to make headway in East Coast GRC. Nicosia is really popular with the older folk. And East Coast people are a bit something, they like to vote for the opposition party. And so they would increase the vote share. Potentially, because Workers' Party is so popular right now, potentially this could even spill over to Marine Parade GRC. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, and so it means that possibly they don't quite get close enough to actually win. And if you recall, when I sort of looked at the chart earlier, I said that the opposition was going to be strong, like 29 Capricorn, like just 1 degree away from the ascendant, tells me that they were just this friggin' close to making waves. And which means that's why I've thought about this, ladies and gentlemen. I really thought about this. Like, how does the astrology describe the outcome, which was that Workers' Party is going to do well, but just not enough. Just not enough to actually win another GRC. So ultimately, it's going to be a disappointment because I think, and I know a lot of people were actually hoping for a lot more wins this time around. And I'm even thinking that short of the Workers' Party, because when the chart says the opposition is strong, it doesn't just refer to the Workers' Party. It could also refer to Mr. Tan Cheng Bock, Dr. Chi Soon Juan, Dr. Tambia, and a couple other people. It's all going to be like really, really close. So which means we have a bit of, so these are my thoughts, and this is why I think this is absolutely a lose-lose situation for Singapore. Because the PAP is going to get voted in, Workers' Party is going to keep their 6 seats, And on paper, it looks like the PAP has had yet another landslide victory. It is yet another whitewash. But the problem is that we might see a popular vote that goes way below. And if you think about it, this is bad. I mean, even for the people who have seen the supposedly leaked video thingy that featured Chan Chun Sing talking about a crisis, but you see, he's right. The thing about a crisis is that it's supposed to deliver so many more votes to the incumbent, especially one as strong as PAP, who has ostensibly done a really good job at handling this whole situation. They should get an overwhelming majority, but the fact is, if they don't, let's just say, what if they just got 50-something% of the popular vote? And this scares me, because it tells me that given what Singapore is going to be facing in the next few months, and what this means is that the government is going to have to make a lot of unpopular policies. It means people are going to be displaced in some way or another, and people are just not going to like the kind of adjustments that they have to make while we all sort of weather through this shitty storm that 2020 is. And it's going to be very hard for a government to do that if the people don't support them. I honestly don't think that PAP has done themselves any favors this election. And it's very worrying also, because I like you to consider, and seriously, I mean, the election's in 2 days' time, who knows what's going to happen. But seriously, the thing is, if in East Coast GRC, where Heng Swee Keat is supposed to be our next prime minister in waiting, and he's not up against lawyers. I'm sure that I have to admit, I don't really know the profiles of the rest of the people in East Coast GRC, but it's not like, he's up against Nicosia. I mean, she's young. She's younger than I am. She's pretty, and articulate. But what I'm saying here is that he's not up against some CEO or like, no. I mean, Nicosia, like a young lady, and nothing wrong with her. But the thing is, she's up against, the next prime minister. And what I'm trying to say here is that if the vote share doesn't reflect decisively in Heng Swee Keat's favor, and what this means is that it could demonstrate a lack of faith in what they are touting to be the next leader of the country. There are several other GRCs where the PAP is expected to have like a landslide victory. I mean, in a lot of these GRCs where the opposition are not expected to win at all, like they're not even expected to get anywhere close to making waves. Like, for example, in Jalan Besar GRC, and where it's pretty much PAP versus People's Voice. And I think I echo the thoughts by saying that most people wouldn't expect Mr. Lim Tian to get really, honestly, like anywhere close to winning. But let's just say he garners a significant percent of the constituency vote. Now, that would reflect very much on what people thought of the PAP candidates that were in that constituency. This is what I mean. That how is it possible for the PAP to still have a whitewash and yet still be destabilized from within? So this is what I think. So there you have it. 6 seats to Workers' Party, the rest to PAP, but a huge blow to the popular vote. Delivered it. Right. See you guys, and let's see what happens after